John Taffer may be the best known bar rescuer, but Gordon Ramsay knows a thing or two about rescuing bars as well. We got a glimpse of that in 2008 when he visited Handlebar, a Long Island bar and restaurant. There, he encountered a host of problems, from an irresponsible owner to a chef who didn't want to be a chef. Was Ramsay able to rekindle the flame of the people in charge of the place, or did they go back to their old habits? How did they do after the show? Let's find out. At the beginning of this episode, we traveled to New York, but not to the big city, but to the quiet town of Mount Sinai, home to many working-class families. One of those many workers was William Billy Leroy, a former construction worker turned bar and restaurant owner. He decided to get into the hospitality business on a whim with his wife Carloyn by buying and reviving the Handlebar, a beloved, although somewhat run down, establishment in the local community. But it seems they only bought it for its facade because its interior was falling apart, though it's nothing Billy can't fix. That's how Billy and Carloyn planned to get the Handlebar to thrive. Despite that, after just a single year, trouble started to arrive. It turns out that 70% of the revenue was coming from the bar section, while the dining room was barely getting any customers. Of course, Billy doesn't understand why, although his staff recognizes that he is a distracted and somewhat unmotivated owner. On the other hand, the kitchen is in complete ruin, filled with dirt, grease, and all sorts of other grime. The dining room doesn't excite either, as it looks straight out of the 1980s. Everyone dislikes it except Billy, who sees it as one of the restaurant's greatest assets. And what about the food?
Melissa is an excellent chef.
I'm not a chef.
Well, that's reassuring, Billy. I'm used to stubborn chefs who think their food is the best, but this is the first time I've seen a chef who doesn't want to be one at all. Despite the Leroys praising the food, both staff and customers hate it. Melissa isn't even offended. She acknowledges that it's the truth, and that she only took the job because she had no other choice. As you can see, the Handlebar has a mix of problems that are driving the Leroys to ruin. If their business fails, they risk losing their home. That's the perfect time to call in Chef Ramsay, who actually gets lost on his way to the restaurant, as he encounters a sign indicating west on both sides. That's not the Handlebar's fault, but it's still pretty funny. Upon meeting Ramsay, Billy admits he was a little nervous meeting someone such as Chef Ramsay, with his career full of success and fame. His place might not be well run, but he's a respectful owner, and I like him. Amanda, one of the waitresses, was also nervous about Gordon's presence, but not so much due to his reputation, but because of how handsome she thought he was. She says he has a pretty nice body, and he's pretty hot for an older guy. When it's time to eat, Gordon receives a massive 4-page menu full of dishes.
Everything that's here is pretty much crap food.
As a starter, Gordon tries a clam chowder, and as surprising as it sounds, he quite likes it. It is not often that Ramsay actually likes the food on Kitchen Nightmares, so that in itself is pretty surprising, even to Chef Melissa, who didn't even think it was good. After that comes the seafood crepes, made with overly firm scallops and imitation crab meat. Of course, Ramsay didn't take long to send that one back as well. Now we're truly in Kitchen Nightmares. After that, Ramsay has to wait for another half hour for the beef fondue. Considering the point of fondue is to cook your own food, why did it take them so long to deliver it? Well, that little ritual didn't work, because what came out of that cauldron was rancid. He also doesn't know why anyone would deep fry a filet mignon, one of the top cuts of beef. Carloyn says that if he spits it out, she's leaving. And check out this bald biker dude sitting beside her. What's he up to? He really seems to be there to be a comforting hand for her by the looks of it.
That was rancid, pointless, tasteless, a complete utter joke.
Oh, that hurt. Although he's right, why would you deep fry a filet mignon? Carloyn starts to cry, but rest assured her biker friend is there for her. I've never seen a biker with such a caring and compassionate look on his face ever in my life before. Also, people have commented online that Carloyn looks a little off in this episode due to her somewhat erratic behaviors.
I kind of knew deep down inside that there has to be something wrong with the restaurant.
Following Ramsay's criticism, Carloyn continues to cry and call the situation a disaster. But Billy still doesn't see the problem, even when Ramsay tells him so face to face. Ramsay also confronts Melissa, but she simply doesn't want to be a chef and never had a passion for cooking. At the dinner service, the Handlebar horrors continue, like Bill's signature mushroom dish that no one would eat even for money, as well as combining powdered mashed potatoes with fresh ones to reutilize ingredients. After an hour of service, the kitchen ran out of vegetables, so they had to improvise with radishes, which ain't too popular with the diners.
I wouldn't eat the radishes either.
Perfect. Faced with so many problems, Ramsay reminds Billy that the main problem is the food, but he continues to refuse to believe it. Now let's move on to our favorite section, the fridge inspection. And wow, the one at the Handlebar is a real mess.
The reminiscence of Exxon Valdez.
Jokes aside, the fridge is completely filthy, full of gunk, and food with more gunk inside. The worst part is that when he confronts Billy and Melissa, they assure him that the fridge was dirtier in the past.
It looks 60–70% times better than it used to look in here.
I don't want to imagine what it possibly could have looked like when it was at 0%. Instead of taking Ramsay's suggestions, Billy starts lamenting that he doesn't give him credit for renovating the Handlebar. Now, I really need to see what this place was like before, because I can't understand how it could have been worse than it was at this current moment. As a result of his findings, Gordon orders the staff to deep clean the kitchen. After that, he again tries to have a conversation with Billy, though he doesn't take criticism and believes he's just humiliating him in front of millions of viewers.
I wouldn't talk to my dog the way you talk to me.
Sure, Billy, because dogs should be treated with love. Tired of listening to Gordon, the owner leaves the restaurant without explanation. The waitresses try to motivate him to return, reminding him that many people depend on the restaurant's success, though Billy remains in denial. He even calls his wife to tell her that he wants to sell the Handlebar as soon as possible, as he would rather go back to being a construction worker than continue with this nightmare. Fortunately, Carloyn is not as stubborn as her husband, so Ramsay sits down with her to initiate the rescue plan, despite Billy not being present. For that night's service, Ramsay teaches Melissa several new dishes that are simple to prepare and, best of all, with fresh ingredients. Finally, the customers start to arrive and love the new appetizers. Melissa wasn't so bad after all, she just needed a push. In the middle of the service, Billy decides to come back looking pretty angry still, though Carloyn helps him calm down and accept Gordon's help. On the other hand, Melissa began to get overwhelmed with the amount of orders and stopped communicating with her coworkers, decreasing the quality of the food. Billy did nothing but watch as a night that was going well crumbled to pieces, but at least that made him realize that he needed Gordon's assistance more than ever. After that, Ramsay meets with the staff to prepare them for the relaunch and a new menu. After hours of work, Gordon's team completely revamped the Handlebar, or rather, updated it to the modern era. Almost everything is new, from the tablecloths to the lamps, and no more 1980s decorations. As a main feature of the renovation, the Handlebar has become Long Island's first gastropub.
What's a gastropub?
Good question.
Remember, this episode was filmed in 2008. At that time, there was a brief attempt to bring the concept of a gastropub to the States from the UK, where it had been popular for a few years at that point. The concept of gastropubs is simple: a bar or a pub, but with restaurant-quality food. So you get the best of both worlds. The ambience of a pub, but with good quality dishes rather than crappy pub fare. Along with a revamped menu, since Billy is passionate about motorcycles, Ramsay organized a motorcycle rally for the relaunch, inviting Twisted Sister lead singer Snider. And that's how the Leroys ended up riding motorcycles alongside Snider and Gordon Ramsay, all for having a failing restaurant. Amazing. Back at the Handlebar, Ramsay introduces everyone to the new menu, one that's smaller and easier to prepare. Melissa, from now on, you have no excuse. That night is the restaurant's grand reopening, and it is as full as ever, with Billy acting as host and the waiters performing at their highest level. If you look closely, you can see WWE star Mankind entering the restaurant. He's only briefly shown on the episode though. He confirmed his presence on his MySpace account at the time. Remember MySpace? I was able to dig up the old post. This would make sense, as Foley and Snider are both neighbors and friends in real life. Back to the kitchen, where if there was one person who hadn't yet gotten into the new dynamic, it would be Melissa, who refused to communicate. In the middle of the service, Snider himself shows up with a motorcycle that he starts auctioning off on the restaurant's website to help raise money for the March of Dimes. In the kitchen, Melissa still hasn't got into her groove yet, and as a result nearly served out a burnt steak. Then, she overcooked the bottom of a salmon. It came back to the kitchen, but this time she sends out one that is undercooked and raw in the center. Either overcooked or undercooked, Melissa seems to never get it right. Before she causes another disaster, Gordon and Billy ask her to start working with the other cooks, as she was doing it all on her own. Thanks to that, things in the kitchen start to flow, and the customers enjoy the new menu, including Snider. After that successful relaunch, Gordon congratulates the owners and staff, predicting a bright future for the gastropub. Over the next few days, the Handlebar continued to welcome many customers and built a good reputation, mostly because of Melissa's excellent food and Billy's guidance. But how long did that good momentum last? Well, when Ramsay revisited the restaurant a year later, things were still going great, being happily greeted by Billy and Carloyn. Billy has a new hairstyle, no longer sporting the mullet hairdo, although he still has a stash. On the other hand, Melissa is still the head chef. She really did like cooking after all, I guess. As for the fridge, it is 100% clean all the time. All thanks to Billy's management, who despite the economic downturn at the time, was able to keep the Handlebar afloat. Then, Ramsay tries a dish from the restaurant and it is absolute delight. Gordon is so charmed by the restaurant's direction that he assures the owners that they have nothing to worry about. But was he right? What happened to the Handlebar in the long run? We're used to Ramsay mostly being right about his predictions, but in the case of the Handlebar, it was one of the few times he was wrong. Unfortunately, the Handlebar closed in 2009, shortly after Gordon's second visit. The Leroys never clarified their reasons, but considering Billy complained multiple times about the economy, perhaps they had to sell it for the sake of their financial future. Before that, Handlebar barely had 2.2 stars on Yelp based on just 5 reviews, though the negative ones seemed to be from angry viewers. Reviewers from real Yelpers agree that the restaurant was greatly improved after Gordon's renovations, even though they still had problems cooking the meat. Melissa. Other than that, Handlebar served its purpose of bringing people together for a relaxing time. Too bad the Leroys had to close it down. After that, the property was taken over by Skybox Restaurant and Sports Bar, though it gathered very bad reviews on Yelp and ended up closing. Now, the former Handlebar is occupied by Benchwarmers Tavern and Grill, which enjoys 3.6 stars on Yelp and is known for its American-style menu and event nights. At least they're fulfilling Ramsay's original intent for the Handlebar. And what happened to its owners? Sadly, Billy passed away in 2015 after a long battle with cancer, so we can't rule out that they had to close the restaurant for that reason. As a curious fact, in Billy's obituary, we can find that he is survived by his son Eric, his sisters, his brother, and some nieces and nephews, but there's no mention of Carloyn. I couldn't find anything about her elsewhere either. It's rather odd that there is no mention of Carloyn, unless they were no longer a couple, perhaps. Despite leaving us at the age of 60, Billy left a big mark on the local community and Kitchen Nightmare fans. And while Billy was indeed one of the more stubborn owners Chef Ramsay had to deal with, he wasn't cruel or mean-hearted like many of the other restaurant owners on the show. 8 years after his passing, and more than 15 years since the episode aired, people are still leaving condolences to this day that mention his appearance on Kitchen Nightmares. All I can say now is rest in peace, Billy. We miss you.